Well, my boys, days like this do not come around very often. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to a very special episode of Yammy Noob. Today we are doing absolutely silly things and riding track bikes on the street. If you saw the title of the video, if you saw the thumbnail for today, yes, it is the first ride impression of the MV Agusta F3 800 RC, aka the Reparto Corse Edition. This is such a special motorcycle. Only 400 of these units exist in the world. This is number 203 of 400. If you saw my reveal video, then you've got the baseline for this bike, but I'll give you some figures right now just so you get a sense for it. It's a 798cc 3-cylinder engine, so you guys already know I'm going to like it very much. Makes about 150 horsepower, 153 with the race kit. So you're sitting at 150 range, weighs about 410 pounds, wet and ready to ride. Has this SC Project spicy exhaust on its single-sided swing arm, this amazing tricolore paint job. It is a very cool motorcycle, and even though this design's been around since about 2013, it still looks really cool. I think this little beak at the front right here with the little grill right there looks awesome. The Cyclops light right here. This is very GSXR to me, which may be the inner squid in me. Maybe that's the reason I like it so much. But I did want to shout out, the only reason I have this motorcycle is because the fine folks over at Eurocycle, these guys right here, they're the guys I've bought the Panigale V2 from. I'm actually buying another motorcycle from them here pretty soon for a beginner bike giveaway series. But my guy over there, Chris, he's a cool dude. He does track days all the time. I'm way faster than him, but he won't accept that. But anyways, they're very nice, and they lent me this motorcycle to try and ride around for a bit. In return, that I would send them hordes of yammy people buying bikes from their dealership. So they got a really cool dealership out in Las Vegas. But the best part is they send bikes all over the nation. So for me, I live here in Texas, but even though these guys are based out west, they can deliver bikes to me, which is really, really great. I think it's a great dealership experience, and I'd love for you guys to click the link down below and check them out. But without further ado, let's jump aboard this wonderful machine and talk about it today, because days like this, they don't come around very often, do they? First ride impression on an Italian track bike. Start it up here. Starts right to life. Or to neutral. So, first thing you're going to notice on this machine is that it's got super sport ergonomics. It's a race bike for the street. You already know what it is. Got the fancy little decal right there, little badging. Now, one thing that the astute among you might notice is this is not a fancy TFT, is it? No, it is not. This is a very much last generation, sort of late 2000s LCD screen right here. But you know what? This is a track bike. It is a race bike, so I can almost forgive it for that. However, that is looking a little long in the tooth. Some of the controls here also feel very old school. This right here's got these squishy little buttons for you to flip through here on the screen. Because it is Italian motorcycle, it already has an exhaust malfunction. It's already got a check engine light, which, hey, what do you expect, right? We're sitting over here with the super beefy Nissan Master Cylinder. That looks to be about a 19 mil. It looks about as big as my race bike's brakes. So very nice setup. The clip-ons right here are pretty wide, but not as wide as I'd like. I like them a little wider on a race bike. They're not adjustable too, which is a bit of a bummer, so you'd have to get a whole new clip-on setup for this. And of course, it does make this awesome sound from this SC Project exhaust. 3-cylinder, revs all the way out to about 13,500 RPM. It just sounds so good. All right, let's get this thing out of the road, man. What a blast. Are you kidding me? I get to ride this thing? So right off the bat, the first thing I just got to mention, the first thing I don't like about this bike is the rear brake. I don't know if you guys can see, it's got this stumpy little brake lever down there. I never can quite get it right. So that's the first time I've ever encountered that on a motorcycle. I don't really love it. Up and down quick shifter on this bad boy, which is very cool. So you go up here into third. Down 2 gears with that spicy 3-cylinder sound, man. What a blast. The big thing you got to know about this bike, man, is that when they say race bike, they mean it, dude. This thing feels absolutely raw. And the interesting thing about it is it makes no power at the bottom end or the mid-range. You have to squeeze this thing like an R6 to get any meaningful power out of it. I'm at about 6,000 RPM right now. If I whack open the throttle, I haven't really moved a whole lot. You gotta really keep this thing on the boil, which makes sense. That's what it's designed to do. But as a street bike, which is so silly to even consider this thing a street bike, but it has headlights and it has lights and turn signals and all that, so you gotta talk about it. You know, it doesn't work very well because you don't have bottom end punch, you don't have grunt and torque from it, which is one of the cool things about a 3-cylinder engine. You want that mid-range grunt and torque. So it's interesting that MV Agusta has designed this thing to have a lot of top end power and not a whole lot in the mid-range, because hey, you're at the racetrack, you are pretty much always in the top end of the power band. You're not dipping down below 7,000 or 8,000 RPM on something like this. So we get it down here into 4th gear, cruising along this highway. We're just getting a sense for this bike, trying to see what it's about. And the first two things that I think about whenever I ride any new motorcycle is the throttle and the brakes. Those are the most immediate and tactile interactions with the motorcycle. And the throttle feels really nice on this bike. It feels very old school, which I like. Even though this is a ride-by-wire system, it has traction control, has all kinds of cool goodies on it, this thing still feels really analog and tactile to me. I get a really good sense of what it's doing here. Open and closing. I can feel a nice gradual linear progression between 5, 15, 20% throttle, whatever it may be, you know. Feels very nice and linear. The brakes, I gotta talk about, man. We're working with these huge Brembo calipers, and not stylemas, nothing super fancy, but the master cylinder is really what makes it for me, man. This is a proper race spec, huge Nissan master cylinder. Got a big beefy lever on it. It's far away from the bar, so you can get a lot of leverage on it and really pull when you're on the track. I think that's gonna be a great setup whenever I get it out to Eagles Canyon Raceway. So there's no one behind me, so I'll show you right here. The thing just absolutely comes to a dead stop. It's absolutely crazy, as you can tell. Let's get it down 2 gears using that auto blipper. Let's get a sense for the power here. It's all at the top. Feels absolutely amazing once you actually get it up on the boil and get it doing its thing. But beyond that, you gotta really work for it. Absolutely, you gotta really work on this motorcycle. One thing I really like is that this quick shifter up and down feels like a first generation quick shifter. So it's super tactile, it's super immediate, super raw. I mean, that's the big takeaway on this motorcycle, man. Everything is so goddamn raw on this thing, and I love it for that. As a street motorcycle, it's not really going to work so well when you do that with it, but at the same time, like, having a bike that is this raw from the factory is pretty special. You don't really see this that often. And one thing I want to talk about in this vlog is the elephant in the room. It's the Triumph 765 Daytona. That bike, we got to talk about that bike in relation to this one. So we'll get going here in a little bit, and I'll keep chatting about it. I want to see if I've got it in some sort of map or something, because I'm not getting face-melting performance. Now, I'm not to say that it's going to be face-melting performance. It only makes about 150 horsepower, so we're not talking, you know, R1 lightning speed crazy stuff from it. But at the same time, you know, you do want a strong amount of pull, so perhaps it's in some sort of mapping in here that's not going to allow me to actually get a lot of performance out of it. So I definitely want to stop and make sure we take a look at that. And don't worry, guys, we are going to hit some twisties. We are not just going to be stuck on the highway for this whole video. That would be a crying shame to not get this thing on some nice twisty roads. So don't you worry, we will be doing that. So absolutely, it's difficult to talk about this thing without talking about the Triumph Daytona 765 Moto 2 Limited Edition. That is a oddball displacement limited edition 3-cylinder motorcycle. That's what this is exactly. So how do they compare against each other? Man, there's no comparison. Honestly, this thing is so much more raw. It's so much more race bike. It actually revs out. It feels like a proper racing engine. The 765, unfortunately, because it just utilizes the Street Triple 765, it doesn't feel nearly as racy as this thing. This thing feels just so pure, like a real sport bike, you know? Because for me personally, I can't have a sport bike that ends at 11,000 RPM in this category. I just can't. It doesn't feel right to me. I need it to rev out. I need it to make like it makes power at the top. The 765 just peters out and it's just too linear. It's got to have this sweeping power to the top. That's the fun stuff about a sport bike, at least to me. I know some people might disagree with me, but that's what I like in a sport motorcycle. The other thing as well is that because this is based on a 2013, 2012-ish motorcycle, it just feels so much more old school and classic than the 765. It's not plagued by a ton of electronics that make it feel, you know, kind of squishy and digital and that kind of stuff. This thing still feels really analog, even though it has, you know, some traction control and rider modes and all that kind of stuff. A weird feature that it has actually is on the front end. It has a anti-rear lift system, and I don't think I've ever seen a bike with this system, but what it does is if you go under extremely heavy braking, it'll modulate the brake pressure for you so that you don't lift the rear wheel, and so you actually have more traction. That's pretty cool. I don't know about, you know, having that on a race bike application. I like just, you know, no traction, just give me everything, let me do the work. But, you know, for a street bike, that's kind of cool. Another thing that's weird about this bike is it comes with Pirelli Rosso 3s on it. I don't know if Eurocycle just has the bike with those Rosso 3s on it, but that's not an appropriate tire for this machine, especially if you're considering just using it as a track bike. That is not an appropriate tire to use for something like this. You definitely want something like the Super Corsa SP. You want something that is going to have tons of edge grip and that is actually capable of producing really good lap times. Now, that's not to say you can't take your bike on track with something like the Rosso 3s, but there are certainly better tire choices in the category. This SC Project exhaust that this thing is equipped with just sounds the absolute business. It's incredible what this thing sounds like. However, one thing that's very clear over time is you don't want an exhaust setup like this on the street. This thing really tends to drone. It's fine on the race bike because you're never stuck at a single RPM, but damn, on the street, this really blows. This is why I tell you guys, you know, some of you like to ride super sports on the streets, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but a real race bike on the street is absolutely horrible. You do not want that for street riding, trust me. Let's get over here on the side of the tire. The first thing I noticed with this motorcycle is the front end feel is so different from something like the Panigale V2. This motorcycle actually turns in a lot slower than those bikes, and it feels much more similar to my race bike in that you prioritize mid-corner stability over initial pressure to flick in, right? So right over here, you take this right-hander, it'll dive into the corner, but it takes a little bit more effort to get over there, and I really like that. I don't like super twitchy, like knife edge kind of front end feel. I like a solid, predictable, smooth front end feel. So it's really interesting that this bike is already kind of set up like that from the factory. And as you guys may have noticed, I'm keeping a steady throttle hand here, but the MV Agusta tends to kind of lurch a little bit in the lower RPMs. Overall, this bike just does not like low RPM stuff. It likes to be on the boil and having fun. Just having fun here on the street, obviously not pushing very much. We're definitely getting this thing out on a racetrack to see what it can do on the actual limit, but you can't really push around here. All you can get a sense for is what it's like from side to side, and it's incredibly stable, but you see back there the suspension setup is so stiff because it's a race bike. It just cannot even barely handle any bumps in the road without it getting really upset. It really feels a lot closer to my race bike than the Daytona 765 or even the Ducati Panigale V2. This thing does not feel that far away from my race bike, honestly. Really enjoyable bike, man. Really nice. Just gotta watch for bumps because it doesn't handle it very well. I love the way the auto blipper works. Really nice. Such a stable bike, man. Mid-corner stability is rock solid on this thing. It's really cool. But again, it's so ridiculously inappropriate for street riding. Maybe they made the rear brakes so little because they were like, you're not even going to use that on track. Don't worry about it. Yeah, low speed revs, it's super confused. I think the bike is kind of like, why would you ever keep me low in the revs, you know? Feels like it's to just have a pit mode and that's about it. It has such like a kind of magic quality to it. It doesn't really feel like it picks up speed a whole lot, but it is still picking up speed. It's comical how stiff the suspension is. The Panigale V2 is set up so much better for a regular street rider. This thing's ridiculously aggressive. Anything more gnarly than this, like a B road or anything like that, and this thing is just all out of sorts, man. Kick it back a little bit since we're in this neighborhood section, but it is nice to flick the MV through these tighter stuff, kind of mixed roads. I'm just trying to see what it does when you present it with, you know, more traditional street stuff, and boy, it really doesn't like it. You guys will definitely have to stick around for my on-track review of this thing, because that's where it's really at home, and that's what it's designed to do. This is almost the same as riding a competition dirt bike on the street. You're like, well, yeah, it does it, but there's really no point to doing it, you know? It's not what it's designed to do. Kind of feels like that way with this thing. I just can't believe they'll sell you a bike like this. This thing is so raw, dude. It's crazy. I've never ridden a factory motorcycle that is this raw. Jeez, that suspension. An interesting thing about the MV is that it doesn't really use like Öhlins or any super top shelf components. I think these are forks designed by MV themselves. I didn't see any branding on them, so I think these are MV Agusta forks, which is kind of unique. Most super racy bikes will use Öhlins or Showas or KYBs or something like that. They'll go to another manufacturer that can make something great. Yeah, man, it's so similar to my race bike. It's crazy. How do they sell you something like this? How's that allowed? Man, what a cool bike. I mean, it sucks for street stuff, don't get me wrong, but I cannot in good conscience judge it based on that, because this is the racing edition of this bike. It is not really designed for street use. They've made literally no concessions for you to use this thing on the street, so I can't in good faith just be like, oh yeah, like it's, you know, the seat is hard as a rock, the suspension's so stiff, the throttle's kind of jank, the whole thing feels kind of jank. It's like, that's not really fair to it, you know? But I did want to get you guys on the road with it, just so you can see what an actual sort of factory track bike is like for the street. It's not great. You really don't want something like this for street riding. I'd be much happier on a motard or my sled, or even the Smart Pillin 401. That just makes more sense for the average street riding, you know? All right, guys, so rounding out today's video, this is our first impression ride on this wonderful machine, the MV Agusta F3 800 Reparto Corse Edition. One of the longest names I've had here in the shop in a while. What do I think? It's a very uncompromising motorcycle. It is one of the most unique sport bike experiences that you can have. Even beyond something like the Triumph Daytonas, the Street Triples, this bike has a special something that really sets it apart. That 798cc engine is super unique. The way it feels is super unique. The kind of power band it has is really unique. It doesn't really have an equal, in my opinion. So the type of person that should get this is someone who is really interested in the most bespoke and unique European motorcycling experience that money can buy. I think it's incredibly uncompromising. It's scary how similar it is to my race bike already, just in factory form. I kind of thought it was going to be a bit of a marketing gimmick for the RC and all that stuff, but it actually really is super committed and super focused. The brakes feel amazing. That huge Nissan Master Cylinder feels really, really good. I'm excited to see how it's going to feel over the long term of the motorcycle and, you know, on track and that kind of use, because even though today's first ride was on the street, I think it's very important to keep in mind that MV Agusta designed this motorcycle to live and breathe at the track. So as you guys know, I'm a club racer in CMRA. I've got my own race prepped 675R. I spend a lot of time at the track, and so I'm definitely going to get this machine on track and see how it does in environments where the limits are being pushed. I'm a little concerned about these tires. These would not be my preferred tire choice for track day use. I don't really love the Rossos. This is not as aggressive as I would like, so we're going to have to work around that a little bit. But other than that, I just think it's such a raw, such a perfect, balanced motorcycle. Feels really, really good to ride. It's terrible for the street, but that's not what it's designed for, so we're not going to, you know, put that against it. But it's a very, very sweet ride. Hope you guys enjoyed this video.
Hey, thanks for watching the video. Why don't you click this one right over here and you can keep watching some more of your sweet Papa Yam. Maybe this one will have fun memes in it. Maybe it'll be interesting. Maybe I crash a motorcycle. Who can say? Maybe you should click and find out.